I mean, imagine you're sitting in a perfectly quiet room, right? Like just doing your work.
Just a totally normal Tuesday.
Yeah, exactly. A normal day. And then your phone buzzes on the desk. You glance down, and it's an email from your boss. And the subject line just says, "Quick chat later," with a question mark.
Oh, the dreaded quick chat. That is terrifying.
Right. It is, because in a fraction of a second, before you've even consciously processed the words, your heart rate just spikes.
Oh, absolutely. Your stomach drops completely.
Yeah, you get that cold sweat prickling at your hairline, and you immediately start cataloging every single thing you might have done wrong this entire week.
Like a mental Rolodex of mistakes.
Totally. Now, if I asked you in that exact moment what just happened, you'd probably say, that email completely ruined my morning. Or, my boss just gave me a panic attack.
Because that's just how we talk about it.
Right. It's entirely natural. We talk about our emotions as if we're just, passive targets in a shooting gallery, constantly being struck by reality.
We really do. I mean, our default language assumes that the world acts upon us, and we merely endure the impact.
Like we're just waiting around for things to happen.
Exactly. We describe ourselves as moving through life, waiting for the next external event to hit us and, dictate our internal weather.
It's a framework that paints the human experience as fundamentally reactive.
And that framework is exactly what we're going to dismantle today on the deep dive.
Right.
Because we are taking a magnifying glass to the hidden, microscopic architecture of how you and every single person you interact with actually process reality.
That's a big one today.
It is. The source material we have on the table today is hot off the presses. Today is Sunday, August 9, 2026, and we are digging into the finalized version 3.0 of a highly specific, quite dense internal document. It's called the TII Technical Note, From Cognitive Mediation to Ontological Prediction.
Which is quite a mouthful.
A huge mouthful.
But it's a remarkable piece of work. It's authored by Hisataka Takasugi, who is often referred to in the field as Prof. T, and he serves as the director of the Takasugi Research Institute. Right, so our mission today is to figure out why we feel the way we feel, basically by tracing the history of how psychology has tried to explain human emotion. But we aren't just doing a history lesson here.
No, not at all.
We're building up to a radical new framework laid out in this document called the Ontological Prediction Model, or OPM. And this model proposes something that sounds almost like science fiction at first glance.
It really does.
It says that you aren't just reacting to your environment, you are continuously actively generating your experience of it before the event even happens.
Which is just a massive conceptual leap.
It's huge. So let's unpack this, because I have to ask, why does a highly technical internal document like this even exist in the first place? I mean, who is Prof. T writing this for?
Well, to understand the document's existence, you really have to look at its primary audience. This isn't, a mass market self-help book that you pick up at the airport.
Right.
It's fundamentally a pedagogical tool. It was drafted specifically for a graduate seminar in psychotherapy theory.
Okay, so this is for students who are already deep in the weeds.
Exactly. Prof. T is trying to correct a very specific, incredibly stubborn misunderstanding among his graduate students, because these are students who are already thoroughly trained in traditional cognitive behavioral therapy.
Which is CBT.
Right, CBT. And when they encounter the ontological prediction model for the first time, their instinct is to just map the new vocabulary directly onto their old familiar concepts.
Oh, I see. They just want to swap out the labels to make it fit what they already know, like just translating it.
Exactly. They hear a word like prediction and they think, oh, sure, that just means a belief.
Right.
Or they hear Prof. T talk about an ontological construct and they think, well, that's just another word for a schema.
Which is a classic CBT term.
Right. But that assimilation completely destroys the actual theoretical move that OPM is making. So Professor T wrote this technical note to basically draw a hard line in the sand.
He's saying, no, you guys are missing the point entirely.
Exactly. He explicitly claims this is an architectural shift in how we understand the mind's causal sequencing.
Okay, an architectural shift.
Yes. Now, he's careful to state that this note doesn't argue OPM is clinically superior to traditional CBT-like. He's not claiming better patient outcomes just yet.
Got it. So he's not saying this cures people faster.
Right. Not yet, anyway. The purpose is conceptual. It's about making explicit the difference in the assumed direction of psychological causation.
Okay, so he's trying to get them to see the blueprint of a completely different building rather than just rearranging the furniture in the old CBT building.
That's a great way to put it.
But to really grasp this new architecture, we have to understand the buildings that came before it.
We do. We need to go back to the baseline.
So walk us through the most fundamental way human beings understand their own emotions, what the document actually calls folk psychology.
Well, in the text, this is referred to as the precognitive event response model. It's also known as the naive model.
The naive model.
Yeah. And the formula is as basic as it gets. It's A leads to C.
Okay, A to C.
An activating event A directly produces a consequence C.
So where does thinking come in?
It doesn't, really. In this model, cognition like your actual internal thoughts, memories, or appraisals are treated as an incidental byproduct. They just don't do any of the heavy lifting.
Oh, wow. So this brings us right back to my example with the email from the boss. Like, the email made me panic.
Exactly.
Or like when you're arguing with a partner and you say, you made me furious. We bring this default mode into our relationships, our workplaces, and certainly into therapy.
We do.
Yeah.
And for a long time, the field of psychology actually formally validated this intuition.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Think back to early classical behaviorism in the early 20th century. Behaviorists like B.F. Skinner were looking at the world through this exact mathematical lens.
Just A leads to C.
Right. They relied entirely on reinforcement history and environmental contingencies. If I introduce stimulus A, I get response C.
So they just ignored the brain entirely.
Pretty much. They deliberately treated the human mind as a black box. They simply didn't care about the internal thoughts intervening between the stimulus and the response because, well, they couldn't objectively measure them.
But why is this A to C model so sticky for us? Like, even knowing it's called the naive model, it is incredibly hard to shake that feeling that the world is causing our pain.
Well, because it feels perfectly chronologically accurate to our lived sensory experience.
Yeah.
We don't perceive a gap.
What do you mean by a gap?
Like, say a car cuts you off in traffic.
Yeah.
Instantly, your blood is boiling and you're hitting the horn. You don't feel yourself thinking about the event.
Right. I'm not sitting there going, oh, that person cut me off. I think I will be angry now.
Exactly. The event happens and the emotion arrives simultaneously. The naive model survives because it maps perfectly onto our visceral experience of time.
It feels completely seamless. It's like you touch a hot stove, your hand pulls away. You don't pause to analyze the heat. The stimulus directly dictates the reaction.
That's a perfect example.
But obviously, human psychology is infinitely more complex than touching a hot stove. Which brings us to a massive turning point, because in 1962, a psychologist named Albert Ellis comes along and essentially takes a sledgehammer to that A to C assumption.
He really did. Albert Ellis is one of the titans who initiated what we now call the cognitive revolution in psychotherapy.
Okay, the cognitive revolution.
Yes.
Yeah?
He introduced the ABC model of rational emotive behavior therapy, or REBT. Ellis looked at the A to C model and said, no, that's not how human beings operate.
So what did he change?
He inserted a mediating vital term right in the middle. He added B for belief.
So it's ABC.
Right. So A no longer directly causes C. Instead, A, the activating event, triggers B, your belief, and it is B that actually causes C, the emotional or behavioral consequence.
Wow. This feels like the moment psychology suddenly gave humans their agency back. Like, it relocates the cause of your distress away from the external world and puts it directly into your own interpretive activity.
It was a massive shift in responsibility, yes.
But Ellis wasn't just talking about passive observational beliefs, right? Because the text notes that in REBT, this B is highly evaluative.
Correct. Ellis wasn't interested in the belief that, the sky is blue.
Right.
He focused heavily on what he termed demandingness.
Demandingness, that's a great word. What does that actually look like in practice?
It's the rigid, absolutist demands we place on reality. It branches out into derivatives like awfulizing, low frustration tolerance, and making global ratings of yourself or others.
Can you give me a concrete example?
Sure. Let's say you go in for a job interview and you don't get the job. That's the activating event.
Okay, the A.
Right. The naive model says the rejection caused your depression, but Ellis says no. The rejection just triggered your demanding belief.
So what is the belief saying?
You aren't just observing that you failed an interview. Your internal monologue is actively asserting, I must not fail. Failing is completely awful. I cannot stand the discomfort of this rejection, and therefore I am a totally worthless person.
Oh, wow. That's heavy.
It is, and that intense evaluative activity, that demandingness, is the B that generates the devastating depression at C.
Okay, I want to make this super clear for you listening because it's a crucial stepping stone to where we're going with OPM. Let's contrast this with the hot stove.
Okay.
If the naive model is touching the hot stove and pulling your hand away instinctively, Ellis is saying that complex emotional reactions are more like reading a text message from your boss saying, come to my office now.
Right.
The digital text itself, like the literal pixels on the screen, which is A, doesn't magically inject panic into your nervous system.
No, it can't.
It's your belief. The B, the thought that, oh my God, I'm about to be fired. I can't pay my mortgage. This is awful and I can't survive it. That actually causes the biological panic of C.
That's a highly effective analogy. The text message has no inherent chemical ability to raise your heart rate. Your interpretation does all the work.
Right. But, if I'm playing devil's advocate here, did REBT actually solve the puzzle? Because if the belief is what causes the pain, aren't we still just waiting for the text message to arrive?
You've hit exactly on the limitation that Prof. T points out in this technical note.
Oh, really?
Yes. In REBT, the sequence still firmly originates with the activating event. The text message still has to arrive first to trigger the sequence.
Right. There's no sequence without the text.
Now, REBT scholars would fiercely defend Ellis here. They'd point out that the person obviously holds those demanding philosophies long before the text arrives.
Sure, you're already an anxious person before the phone buzzes.
Exactly. The belief system is dormant, waiting. But theoretically and pedagogically, the standard clinical diagram, like the way it is drawn on a whiteboard for clients in therapy, always begins with A.
Always.
The external world acts first, the stimulus arrives, and the internal world evaluates second.
So the architecture is still, at its core, reactive. Like, to use a sports analogy, the universe serves the tennis ball and your brain swings the racket. But the racket only moves because the ball came over the net.
Exactly.
Now, Ellis wasn't working in a vacuum. At roughly the same time, another pioneer, Aaron Beck, was developing his own model, which leads us to a slightly different flavor of this cognitive architecture.
Yes. Aaron Beck developed his cognitive model a bit later, formally publishing his key works in 1976.
And he was focusing on depression, right?
He was. Beck was on an independent clinical pathway, deeply focused on empirical research into depression. His sequence is structurally similar to Ellis's, but uses different terminology.
So what are his terms?
He posits a situation, which triggers automatic thoughts or appraisals, which then lead to emotional, behavioral, and physiological reactions.
Situation, appraisal, reaction. It echoes ABC perfectly.
It does. But Beck introduced a layer of depth that became foundational to modern therapy. He introduced the concepts of schemas and core beliefs.
Okay, we hear the word schema thrown around a lot. What exactly is a schema in Beck's architecture?
Think of a schema as a deeper, active, standing cognitive structure in your mind.
Standing meaning it's always there.
Right. It's a deeply ingrained rule or template for how you view the world, yourself, and the future. What Beck actually called the cognitive triad.
Okay.
If your automatic thought is a leaf on a tree, the schema is the root system.
Let's ground that. How does a schema actually form? Like, how do you get one?
Let's look at a hypothetical case. Imagine a child growing up with highly critical, emotionally distant parents.
Pretty common scenario.
Unfortunately, yes. And no matter what grades the child gets, it's never quite enough.
Right.
Over years of this, the child develops a core belief, a schema, that says, I am fundamentally unlovable and inadequate.
So that becomes their root system.
Exactly. That schema becomes a permanent standing structure in their mind. Years later, as an adult, a friend texts them to cancel dinner because they are stuck at work.
Okay, so the situation is the canceled dinner.
Right. But because of that standing schema, the automatic thought that bubbles up isn't, oh, my friend is busy.
Oh, I see. The thought is, they are avoiding me because I'm boring and inadequate.
Precisely. And then the reaction is overwhelming sadness and a decision to isolate.
Wow. So Beck's model is explicitly more architectural than RBT because it names the schema as this pre-existing structure that dictates which automatic thoughts are allowed to arise.
It does.
So if we compare Ellis and Beck through the lens of Profasti's document, how does the document view them? Because they seem really similar.
They are. Prof. T argues that despite the nuanced differences in vocabulary and depth, REBT's demandingness versus Beckian schemas, both models share a fundamental underlying architecture.
What does he call it?
He calls it the event appraisal response framework.
Meaning they follow the same chronological three-step dance, like step 1, the event initiates the sequence. Step 2, cognition steps in to mediate and assign meaning to that event. And step 3, The reaction follows as a direct consequence of that cognitive mediation.
Correct. The sequence always flows forward from the external situation.
Okay, if I'm a seasoned, sophisticated CBT practitioner listening to us right now, I might be rolling my eyes.
Oh, I'm sure some are.
Right. I'd be saying, wait a minute. We know schemas exist before the event happens. Schema theory explicitly states that core beliefs actively bias a client's attention and memory before a situation even fully unfolds.
Yes.
So is this ontological prediction model just setting up a massive straw man? Aren't schemas already considered active?
That is a highly intelligent pushback, and honestly, it's precisely the defense Profisti anticipates in the text.
Where he sees it coming.
He does, and he addresses this with heavy pedagogical honesty. He explicitly admits that if he were to characterize Becky's schemas as merely passive, inert templates just lying dormant in the brain, it would be a weak, intellectually dishonest argument.
Okay, so he's not saying CBT therapists are stupid.
Not at all. He acknowledges that modern CBT therapists know schemas have an active filtering effect.
So where does he draw the line? Like, what's his actual critique of CBT then?
His critique is incredibly specific, and it comes down to the direction of the causal arrow.
The causal arrow.
Right. In traditional models, schemas are treated as antecedents that color the interpretation of a situation. They act as filters for incoming data.
Okay.
But, and this is the crux of the entire paper, they do not make continuous generative prediction the central architecture of the model.
Okay, let me see if I can translate that difference because it feels a little slippery. Let's try an analogy.
Sure.
Traditional cognitive models, like Beck's schemas, are like putting on a pair of heavily tinted red glasses after you walk into a room.
Okay, I like this.
The room is objectively there, the furniture is there, the event is happening independently of you. But because of your schema, your red glasses, you perceive the room differently than someone without those glasses.
That perfectly captures the coloring of interpretation that CBT describes.
Right. But OPM is suggesting something fundamentally different. It's suggesting that you aren't just wearing tinted glasses in an objective room. OPM implies something much weirder is happening before you even turn the doorknob.
That's exactly right. And it perfectly bridges us into what the document calls the predictive generative turn.
The predictive generative turn.
Yes. And Professor G isn't pulling this out of thin air. He's drawing on a massive paradigm shift that has occurred in cognitive science and neuroscience over the last decade or two.
What kind of science?
He specifically cites influential work by philosophers and neuroscientists, like Andy Clark's work on predictive processing in 2013 and Carl Friston's free energy principle from 2010.
Okay, so this is where we get into the really cutting-edge brain science.
Yes. The core premise of the predictive generative turn departs completely from the idea of a brain sitting inside a dark skull, just waiting around for sensory data to arrive from the outside world.
Which is how we normally think of it.
Right. Instead, the brain is a proactive inference engine. It is continuously, relentlessly predicting threat, anticipating opportunity, and allocating physiological resources before the external event actually occurs.
Wait, before?
Before. The document uses a fascinating term for this. Constructive perception.
Constructive perception. I really want to linger on this because honestly, it's mind-bending.
It is.
Constructive perception means that what you consider to be the situation, like the objective reality you think you are reacting to, isn't actually handed to you by the world.
No, it's not.
The situation itself is partly generated by the anticipatory activity of your own predictive system.
It is entirely mind-bending.
Yeah.
Because in the old CBT model, prediction or appraisal follows the event as a way to interpret it.
Right, A then B.
But in OPM, perception and prediction are completely flipped. The prediction precedes the event, and that prediction actually helps constitute the event as you experience it.
Okay, let's go back to our analogies. We said the old model was like a tennis player waiting on the baseline. The universe serves the ball, the event, and the brain evaluates how to swing the racket.
Yeah.
But if OPM is right, the brain isn't a tennis player. The brain is more like a paranoid chess master. But this chess master doesn't wait for the opponent to make a move. This chess master has already analyzed the board, predicted the opponent's strategy, positioned all their defenses around the king, and started sweating, all before the opponent even walks into the room and sits down at the table.
And that chess master is utilizing biological resources to do so. Let's make it more visceral for the listener.
Okay, yeah.
Imagine walking down a dimly lit alley at 2 in the morning.
Okay. Creepy.
The old model says, you see a shadow move. That's the event. You think, it's a mugger? That's the appraisal. And your heart rate spikes. That's the reaction.
Very linear.
But modern neuroscience and OPM says that's backward. Before you even turned into that alley, your brain's predictive engine recognized the context.
Dark, isolated late at night.
Exactly. Your brain predicted a high probability of threat. Because of that prediction, it already elevated your heart rate, it dumped cortisol into your bloodstream, and it dilated your pupils so you could see better in the dark.
Wait, so my body is reacting to a mugger that hasn't even appeared yet?
Exactly. And because your pupils are dilated and your visual cortex is primed to find a human shape, when a stray cat knocks over a trash can and casts a weird shadow, you don't just see a shadow.
I see the mugger.
You constructively perceive a man with a weapon. Your prediction generated the reality of the threat before the external stimulus ever arrived to verify it.
That is profound. I mean, you aren't reacting to the alley, you are generating an experience of the alley based on what you need to protect.
Exactly.
Which brings us directly into the mechanical heart of the ontological prediction model itself. Because if the brain is this anticipatory chess master, how exactly does it organize its defenses? The document introduces a lot of heavy terminology here, so let's carefully decode it.
We must be precise here, yes. Takasugi outlines 3 core terms that build the architecture.
Okay, what are they?
We have the OS, which stands for the Ontological Operating System. We have OCs, which are ontological constructs. And finally, we have ontological variables.
Okay, OOS, OCs, and variables. Let's start with the variables, because they seem to be the VIPs of this whole system. What is an ontological variable?
Ontological variables are the fundamental, non-negotiable human needs that your brain is designed to secure in order to ensure your survival and social cohesion.
Like what?
We're talking about core states like competence, belonging, safety, autonomy, and worth.
So feeling like I belong to a tribe or feeling like I am competent enough to survive, these aren't just nice to haves, right? Historically and biologically, if you didn't have belonging or competence, you got cast out of the tribe and eaten by a tiger.
Exactly. They're existential requirements.
Right.
Now, the ontological operating system, the OOS, is the overarching biological and psychological machinery that governs you. And this system functions through specific, highly individualized ontological constructs, or OCs.
So what's the difference between the system and the construct?
An OC is a specific predictive organization aimed entirely at protecting one of those core variables in a given context.
Okay, so how does an OC actually form? Give me an example of how a person builds one of these constructs to protect, say, their worth.
Let's trace it back. Imagine a person who grew up in an environment where affection was strictly conditional.
Okay.
They only received praise or love when they achieved something spectacular like getting straight A's or winning the science fair. If they were just average, they were ignored or criticized.
That's tough.
It is. Over time, their ontological operating system recognizes a pattern. It says, my core variable of worth is only secure when I am flawlessly achieving.
So the system learns a rule.
Exactly. So the system builds an ontological construct.
Yeah.
A specific predictive engine organized entirely around maintaining flawless achievement to stave off the threat of worthlessness.
Okay, so they have this OC running in the background constantly. Now, how does OPM reconstruct the actual chronological sequence of how this person experiences, say, a Tuesday morning at the office? Let me try to trace the path Takasugi lays out, and you correct me if I stray. First, before the workday even begins, this person's OOS and their specific OC generate an ontological prediction.
Yes.
This prediction acts as a lens that actually helps constitute the situation they're about to experience, dictating what details are salient or important.
That's right.
And simultaneously, this prediction organizes their embodied readiness, their physical action tendency.
Yes, their body is physically bracing for the day. They might have tense shoulders before they even open their laptop.
Then, whatever happens at the office registers as either a prediction error, meaning something unexpected happened, or a confirmation of their prediction.
Right.
Finally, based on that outcome, the OC either updates itself to be more accurate, or it defensively doubles down and preserves its existing organization.
You've tracked it perfectly. And we need to pause here and analyze a key diagram in the text labeled Figure 1.
Okay, Figure 1.
Professor T is absolutely adamant that we do not misread this sequence. He warns his students, do not just look at this as the old ABC linear chain, with one extra box labeled prediction duct taped to the front.
Right. He calls the ontological construct a concurrent generator. I love this phrase. It's not a domino effect where one thing knocks over the next.
No, not at all. A single act of prediction is organizing the entire psychological and biological orchestra at the exact same time.
Meaning what, exactly?
The OC is simultaneously organizing what you notice in the room, the meaning you assign to that data, your muscular readiness, your urge to run or fight, and the very criteria for what will count as a failure. It's all instantiated at once.
This brings us to a massive fork in the road in OPM, the difference between must mode and want mode.
Yes.
Because obviously we all predict things all day long and we aren't all constantly suffering. Where does clinical disturbance like the kind of anxiety or depression that brings someone into therapy actually take root?
Disturbance takes root when the system shifts from want mode into must mode.
Okay, so what's want mode?
In want mode, you prefer an outcome. You want to be competent, you want to belong. If you fail, you experience appropriate disappointment. Your system registers a prediction error, you learn from it, and you adapt. It's flexible.
That sounds healthy.
It is. But in must mode, the predictive system becomes infected with what the text calls an ontological contradiction, or OX.
The ontological contradiction. This is a heavy, almost philosophical concept. Let's spend some real time breaking this down for the listener. What is the contradiction?
Well, an ontological contradiction occurs when a protected variable, let's go back to our example of the person protecting their worth through flawless achievement.
Okay.
It occurs when that variable is treated by the brain as something that absolutely must not be threatened under any circumstances.
Like zero tolerance for failure.
Exactly. The contradiction, the paradox that breaks the system, is that in empirical reality, absolute protection of any variable cannot be guaranteed.
Because you're human.
Right. You are human. You will eventually make a mistake. A project will fail. Someone will criticize you. But in must mode, your system is generating a rigid prediction that this highly probable failure absolutely, unequivocally cannot and must not happen.
It's a paradox. The brain is demanding 100% security in a universe that only offers probabilities.
Precisely.
Let's apply this to a relationship to make it really tangible.
Okay, good idea.
Imagine a woman named Sarah. Sarah has a core variable of belonging that was severely threatened in her past, maybe by a sudden divorce or childhood abandonment.
Very common.
So her system builds an OC in must mode. It says, my partner must never pull away from me because if they do, my belonging is destroyed and I will die.
Right.
But their contradiction is that her partner is a human being. They will eventually get tired or need space or get grumpy.
Exactly. And this leads to the most crucial paradigm-shifting insight of the entire model. Because of this impossible demand, Sarah's psychological disturbance begins long before her partner ever actually pulls away.
Say more about that. How is she disturbed before it happens?
The mere act of predicting in must mode is exhausting. The sheer biological and cognitive cost of insisting that a threat cannot happen, while simultaneously knowing on a deeper level that it could, creates chronic anticipatory disturbance.
Oh, wow.
Sarah is suffering before her partner even wakes up in the morning. She is constantly scanning his face for micro-expressions of boredom. Her nervous system is permanently redlined.
So a subsequent event, let's say her partner actually does ask for some alone time, doesn't originate her panic?
No, it doesn't. The event just supplies the prediction error, or in her distorted view, the apparent confirmation that her system was right to be panicked all along. It just reinforces her system's defensive posture.
Which leads to a radical reevaluation of what a belief actually is.
Yes, it does.
We spent the first half of this deep dive talking about Ellis and Beck, where the belief is the core culprit, but OPM flips this entirely. The text says that a conscious, verbalized belief is merely the linguistic surface of a deeper predictive organization.
Yes. The belief is just the exhaust coming out of the tailpipe.
I want to stick with this because it's fascinating. When Sarah sits on a therapist's couch and says out loud, I believe my husband is going to leave me, traditional CBT says that belief is the root of the problem. We need to challenge the evidence for that belief.
Right.
But OPM says she isn't stating the fundamental cause of her anxiety at all.
Precisely. She is just reading the receipt printed out by a cash register that has already completed the transaction.
Wow, the receipt.
The deeper machine, her ontological construct, has already evaluated the threat to her belonging, dilated her pupils, elevated her heart rate, and prepared her body for abandonment. The conscious belief, he's going to leave me, is just her cognitive brain trying to put words to a bodily and attentional process that was already running at full speed.
The prediction precedes the belief. The body prepares before the mind even knows what it's saying. I mean, this completely reorders mental events as we've understood them for the last 60 years.
It's a total overhaul.
It's almost unsettling to realize how much of our conscious thought is just a post hoc justification for what our bodies have already decided to do.
It is unsettling, but it's also a much more biologically accurate picture of how the human nervous system evolved to operate.
To make this abstract architecture incredibly concrete for everyone listening, I want to walk through the real-world example provided in the text. It's the ultimate side-by-side comparison of how these 4 different models work in practice. Takasugi outlines this in the meeting room vignette.
It's a very clean, relatable, clinical vignette.
Walk us through it.
Okay, a client is sitting at a large table during a team meeting at work. The client speaks up and makes a suggestion. A senior colleague at the table remains completely silent, doesn't make eye contact, and does not respond.
Awkward.
Very. Following that silence, the client feels a rush of intense anxiety, their chest tightens, and they withdraw, refusing to speak for the rest of the day.
We have all been in that exact meeting. You speak, and it lands with a thud. Let's walk through how each of the 4 models we've discussed today interprets that exact same agonizing moment of silence. Let's start with the baseline. The naive model.
Under the naive A to C model, the reading is direct and external. The colleague's silence at the meeting caused the client's anxiety and withdrawal.
Just a direct hit.
Right. The silence itself is the direct agent of the emotional pain. It struck the client like a physical blow.
Simple, chronological, but lacking depth. Okay, now let's apply Albert Ellis and REBT to the room.
In REBT, the sequence changes. The activating event is the colleague not acknowledging the comment. But the silence doesn't cause the pain.
Right.
The belief causes the pain. The client holds an evaluative belief. His silence means my contribution didn't matter. I must be respected, and being dismissed is awful.
That demandingness again.
Exactly. And that demanding belief generates the consequence, which is anxiety and withdrawal.
Okay, now Aaron Beck's cognitive model, how does he map the room?
Beck's model maps it as situation leading to appraisal. The situation is the colleague's silence. The underlying schema of I am inadequate triggers an automatic thought. I just said something incredibly stupid.
And the reaction?
The reaction is the resulting anxious affect, the muscle tension in the chest, and the behavioral disengagement from the conversation.
It's still a sequential reaction to the event. Okay, now the paradigm shift. Take us into the room through the lens of the Ontological Prediction Model. How does OPM read this silent moment?
The OPM hypothesis proposes that the action started long before anyone sat down at the table.
Before the meeting even started?
Yes. Before the meeting even started, this client's ontological construct, likely organized around the core variable of competence or belonging, was already highly active in must mode.
Because the meeting room is a high-stakes environment for competence.
Exactly. The system was already generating vigilance for exclusion. The client's body was already in a state of embodied readiness for dismissal. Their attention was narrowly focused, actively scanning the faces in the room for any sign of threat to their competence.
Let me jump in here because I want to put the listener directly into this person's shoes. Think about how this actually feels physically.
Right.
If OPM is right, this client didn't just casually toss out a comment and then react to an unexpected pause. They walked into that room with their nervous system already humming.
Already on high alert.
They were gripping the edge of the table. They were running a continuous, invisible simulation of rejection in their mind. And so when they finally spoke, and that colleague stayed silent.
The silence wasn't a trigger. Under OPM, the silence was simply incoming evidence. And because the client's system was already biased toward finding a threat, that silence was selectively weighted toward confirming the prediction that was already running.
The silence was scooped up by a machine that was desperately looking for a reason to be anxious. It's like the chess master we talked about. The client already set up the board for an attack on their competence, and the colleague's silence was just the pawn moving exactly where the client predicted it would.
But Professor T adds a critical nuance here that we absolutely cannot skip, especially for clinicians.
What's that?
OPM does not read the ontological construct directly off a single, isolated incident. The text is fiercely clear that this formulation is a clinical hypothesis. You cannot just assume you know the client's core variable based on one meeting.
Right, because maybe the colleague was just looking at an urgent email on their phone and didn't even hear the client.
Exactly. To validate the OPM hypothesis, a clinician has to look for confirmation across multiple settings. Does this anticipatory bodily experience happen at family dinners, on dates? The therapist has to look for the broader pattern of how the predictive system operates.
But regardless of the colleague's actual intent, this completely changes how a therapist would approach the client in the room. If the problem starts before the event, if the anxiety precedes the silence, then the questions we ask in therapy have to fundamentally change, right?
They have to change entirely. That is exactly what Section 10 of the document explores, the clinical consequences of this architectural shift.
So what's the old question and what's the new question?
The traditional clinical question, born out of CBT, is always oriented backward. A therapist asks, "What did you think about what just happened? What was going through your mind when he was silent?"
Right, focusing on the interpretation.
It inherently assumes the event happened first, and we need to retroactively examine your cognitive interpretation of it.
Which subtly reinforces the client's naive belief that the event is the center of gravity.
Yes, it does.
But the OPM-informed question changes the entire trajectory. If I'm an OPM therapist, I'm not asking about the interpretation of the past. The new question is, what was your system predicting, protecting, and preparing to prevent before you even opened your mouth?
This shift has profound, immediate, practical implications in the therapy room. Suddenly, the client's bodily readiness, their subtle action tendencies, and their attentional biases become primary data.
Meaning what, practically?
Meaning that in traditional therapy, if a client is sweating, gripping the armrests, and nervously scanning the room, those physiological realities are often viewed as secondary symptoms.
Just side effects.
Right. They are the unfortunate bodily exhaust of a bad thought, and the goal is to manage them by fixing the cognitive thought first.
Like, let's challenge your irrational belief, and then your sweating will stop.
Right. But in OPM, if your muscles are tense and you are scanning the room for exits, that posture is the primary data. That bodily state is the direct expression of what your ontological construct is actively predicting right now. You treat the bodily prediction as the core mechanism, not a side effect.
And this dramatically changes the role of treatment. You aren't just acting like a copy editor trying to correct a distorted belief, finding the logical typos in the client's journal.
No, you're not.
You are trying to interface with and update a massive underlying predictive organization. You are trying to rewrite the operating system.
And if we connect this to the bigger, more human picture, Professor T points out something remarkably validating for the client.
Validating? How so?
Well, traditional cognitive therapy can sometimes feel slightly invalidating because the implication is often your thoughts are distorted, you are catastrophizing, the threat isn't real.
Right, it's all in your head.
But OPM acknowledges that the threat a client anticipates is sometimes entirely real.
Right. The colleague might actually be a dismissive jerk. The boss might actually be unfair and planning to fire you.
Exactly. The goal of OPM isn't to gaslight the client and say, there is no threat, your belief is mathematically irrational. The clinical target isn't the detection of the threat. The clinical target is to address the rigid, all-or-nothing must-mode terms surrounding the core variable.
Hold on, let me make sure I have this. The problem isn't that Sarah noticed her husband pulling away. The problem is her system's absolute, inflexible insistence that he must not pull away, which mobilizes this exhausting defensive posture that actually prevents her from navigating the real-world relationship.
You nailed it. The rigidity of the prediction is the pathology, not the accuracy of the threat detection.
If I am the listener trying to apply this directly to my own life tomorrow morning, this framing feels incredibly liberating.
It really is.
Instead of agonizing over whether my thought was irrational or distorted, which just makes me feel broken, I should be asking myself a much more compassionate question.
Which is?
When I feel that sudden spike of panic, I should ask, what core variable belonging, safety, competence is my brain desperately trying to protect right now?
Yes.
It turns your anxiety from a broken thought process into an overzealous bodyguard. It's trying to keep you safe. It's just using an outdated threat model.
It is a deeply compassionate model because it recognizes the biological intent behind the suffering.
But as exciting and revolutionary as this sounds, I have to pump the brakes.
Okay, let's pump them.
I promise you, the listener, we weren't just going to blindly cheerlead this new theory. We have to look at the fine print of this technical note. What is OPM actually claiming right now in August of 2026, and what does it still need to empirically prove to the scientific community?
Right. We need to be objective.
Let's do a rigorous scientific reality check. Takasugi outlines exactly what OPM retains from the old models, what it revises, and what it adds. Let's start with what it keeps.
It's important to note that Prof. T respects his predecessors. OPM retains Ellis's central revolutionary insight that external events do not directly, mechanistically cause our emotional reactions.
Okay, so it keeps that agency.
Yes. It retains Beck's recognition that internal appraisal shapes our emotional responses, and it heavily retains the general biopsychosocial premise that the mind, body, and behavior interact in reciprocal loops. It isn't throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
Okay, so what does it fundamentally revise?
It fundamentally revises the assumed starting point of the causal sequence. It rejects the idea that the external event is the natural chronological origin of human experience.
Right, the causal arrow flips.
And crucially, it revises the pedagogical positioning of schemas. They are no longer taught as mere interpretive filters that sit quietly waiting for data. They are promoted to active, continuously operating generative architectures that help constitute the experience situation itself.
And finally, what does it add that is genuinely new?
It adds the entire continuous predictive architecture, the OOS and the specific OCs. It adds the central biological premise that the body prepares for action in advance of the stimulus.
The bodily readiness.
Right. It adds the somewhat radical concept that conscious belief is just a reportable surface expression of a deeper prediction. And it specifies explicit, measurable criteria for what registers in the brain as a prediction error.
This all sounds incredibly robust, but toward the end of the document, Professor T shows a level of intellectual honesty that you rarely see in psychology papers.
He really does.
He explicitly states that right now, as of version 3.0, OPM is a meta-theoretical reconstruction. He admits it is not yet an empirically demonstrated gold standard replacement for CBT or REBT.
This is a vital distinction, and it raises an important point about how true scientific progress actually works. You don't just invent a new vocabulary, write a paper, and declare victory.
Right, you have to prove it.
Professor T outlines a grueling mechanism-level research agenda that OPM must fulfill before it can claim dominance. He specifically warns his students that just getting good comparative treatment outcomes in therapy trials isn't enough to prove the theory.
Wait, why isn't it enough? If OPM therapy cures more people than CBT, doesn't that prove OPM is right?
No, because you could get superior clinical results for the wrong reasons.
Like what?
The therapeutic alliance, the therapist's enthusiasm, or even placebo effects could drive the change, while the underlying architecture remains unproven. To prove the architecture, he demands what he calls time-resolved experimental paradigms.
Time-resolved experimental paradigms. What does that actually look like in a laboratory?
It means we can't just use self-report questionnaires where clients tell us how they felt. We have to design neuroscience experiments using highly sensitive EEG or advanced functional imaging that can track physiological and neurological responses down to the exact millisecond.
Why milliseconds?
Because the core claim of OPM is chronometric. It claims that physiological readiness and attentional bias truly precede reportable cognition.
Oh, I see.
To prove OPM, a scientist has to show the brain allocating resources to the muscles and dilating the pupils milliseconds before the cognitive centers of the brain register a conscious thought. They have to prove prediction beats appraisal to the punch.
That is a staggering burden of proof. What else does he demand?
He wants empirical proof that formulating a clinical case using ontological constructs actually adds measurable value over just using traditional Beckian schema measures. If it's just a new word for schema, the lab will expose it.
Wow.
Furthermore, he wants empirical differentiation between OPM's concept of must mode and existing well-researched concepts like intolerance of uncertainty.
He's challenging his own model to justify its existence against the current literature.
Exactly. And finally, he wants longitudinal proof that successfully revising an ontological construct leads to durable, long-lasting clinical change through pathways that simply challenging a conscious belief cannot reach.
I genuinely love this level of rigor. He is laying out the exact blueprints for the weapons that could destroy his own life's work if he's wrong.
He is.
It positions OPM not as a religious dogma to be blindly memorized by his graduate students, but as a bold hypothesis actively awaiting mechanism-level testing.
It is the absolute hallmark of rigorous science. It demands that we hold our theories lightly and let the data decide.
Which brings our deep dive full circle. We have gone on an incredible paradigm-shifting journey today.
Really have.
We started at the absolute baseline with the naive model, where we viewed ourselves as passive victims just waiting for the world to strike us and cause us pain.
The A to C model.
Right. We moved through the cognitive revolution, exploring the ABC models of Ellis and Beck, where we gained agency by realizing we interpret the world, but we were still ultimately reacting to it.
Still waiting for the text message.
Exactly. And finally, we arrived at the frontier, the Ontological Prediction Model, a framework where our brains are continuous generative engines, constantly setting up the chessboard, spending immense biological energy to protect our core variables before the game even begins.
The shift from reaction to generation is profound. And I would strongly encourage you, the listener, to actively test this architectural shift in your own daily life this week.
How should they do that?
Well, you don't need an EEG machine to start noticing it.
Yeah.
The next time you are about to enter a room or a situation that you know historically stresses you out, whether it's a boardroom, tense family gathering, or even just opening an email from a certain person, take a deliberate pause. Notice your bodily state. Are your shoulders already tight? Is your breathing shallow? Ask yourself, what is my system already predicting before a single word is spoken? What core variable is it aggressively preparing to protect?
It's a brilliant exercise in self-compassion and self-awareness, and it leads me to one final lingering thought for you to chew on as you go about your week.
Let's hear it.
If this model is right, if our brains are constantly actively generating our experienced reality in order to protect our own highly specific, highly individualized core variables, how much of our daily so-called objective conflict with other people is actually just a massive collision of two completely invisible, entirely different prediction models?
Oh, wow.
The next time you find yourself in a heated argument with someone, convinced they are being irrational, pause and ask yourself, are we even reacting to the same room?
It's highly likely you aren't. Your predictions have built two different realities. Thank you for listening, and keep questioning your predictions.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden architecture of the mind. We'll see you next time.